Coming up on show 699, 160 new fast chargers in Canada and your answers to question of the week. Plus, we're talking about the new longer range Tesla Model S and X, a new EV halo car from Kia, why the Nissan Leaf has won a dependability award, the new Porsche Taycan 4S starts to be delivered, and Tesla adds a patent to their arsenal, which could spell out the future of the company. Well, that's the question. We'll find out the answer on the show today. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening in the world. Welcome to EV News Daily for Sunday, 16th of February, for 699 shows. I've said that. So tomorrow, show 700. Wowzers. My name is Martyn Lee, and I go through every EV story, so you don't have to. Thank you to the people that pay for the show, that make the show happen, the ones that put their hand in their pocket every single month, and two new Patreon producers, Kevin HEISLER. Thank you, Kevin, and just simply Julie. No second name, like Cher or Madonna. New producers of the show, thank you as well to MyEV.com. They always help make the show. MyEV is a marketplace for buying and selling and learning about and maybe dreaming, if you just want to just window shop, as it were, at MyEV.com in the US. Well, there's a lot going on in Canada in terms of fast charging infrastructure. As Petro-Canada launched the coast-to-coast network, Tesla's Supercharging highway and Electrify Canada expanding. Says InsideEVs, the latest news is that the government of Canada is going to provide enough funding, 8 million Canadian dollars, for more fast chargers in Ontario. The plan is to build 160 chargers at 73 locations, about $110,000 a site or $50,000 a fast charger. The investment part of their strategic plan to go zero emission by 2040. Natural Resources Canada has so far provided support for about 830 fast chargers, and more to come. More great news we love to see whenever we can report on charging news, and whether it's governments or local authorities, regions, or sometimes the car makers themselves putting in chargers, it's always a good day. Well, a new Tesla Model S Long Range Plus variant is now on sale, and it has a driving range of 390 miles, and the Long Range Plus Model S and X has replaced the previous Long Range version. According to the Tesla website, the Long Range Plus of the Model X SUV does 351. So Model S now 390, and the X now 351. Says Car and Driver. Tesla hasn't provided specific details on how it added to the additional range. There's some interesting curiosities around this, and we'll just dig into them now. The only change on the Model S is the 19-inch standard wheels. They're now called the Tempest design, and they're more flat. Not quite aero wheels, but like a halfway house on the 19-inch ones. That's going to add, maybe a percent and a half, possibly. I don't know, sticking my finger in the air there. We do know that there's a software tweak involved because Elon Musk tweeted that they'll be rolling out a software update over the air, as always, for existing S and X owners that have purchased their car in the last few months. And that's going to unlock some extra range. So that is a software update. But of course, maybe if it's only involving more recent cars, that does also suggest hardware updates. Well, it must, more than suggest, it must mean hardware updates, or everybody would get it. Elon did say that it's a result of lots and lots and lots of little incremental improvements across the board. There's not one magic wand that's been waved here. Engadget says you could theoretically drive from New York City to Pittsburgh with enough battery left to do a tour of the area as well. The Model X, meanwhile, on 351 is up from the earlier 328. The question is whether or not the improvements will translate to further gains for things like the Model 3 and the Model Y. Extra range at the high end only matters if you are a fraction of the Tesla customers that are really going to rinse their battery for those long road trips. To answer Engadget's question of will it mean improvements for 3 and Y, I'm going to sit on the fence here and say possibly. If they've just been gradually improving the powertrain, the drivetrain to the S and the X, and now they are finally making it official, as it were, like lots of little gains. And talking about making it official, by the way, here's something that struck me as interesting. I didn't know this. I love learning things with you on this podcast. Officially, it's now called the Tesla Model S Long Range Plus. And it's the same car, but they had to add plus because they had it retested with the EPA for the new long range of 390 miles, or 351 for the X. But they can't just call it the Model S long range because it's really a different car. And in my perspective, that just goes to show how the regulators aren't set up, if you like, for a new world where companies like Tesla constantly improve the cars, because they come from a world where all of the established car makers do what's called model years. They put a car on sale and that's the car you buy, and it'll only ever get worse because it'll just have wear and tear. They're not set up for companies in the EV world with over-the-air updates, etc., to constantly be making lots and lots of little improvements. This is why it's technically called a different car. It's the Long Range Plus. It has to be, but purely for the regulators to understand that it's different, but it's the same. It's just got a little bit better. Okay, moving on. And a lofty, high-performance electric vehicle is coming from Kia. Like all EVs, something of a gamble. For the mainstream car maker from Korea, it's also a departure because it's going to be a range topper. It's going to be a performance topper. And according to the website The Truth About Cars, Kia's marketing chief Carlos Lejos called the model a halo model. It's going to be called, well, at the minute it's called the Imagine. Might not be called that when it hits the market. It's significant in showing our EV capability for the future, he said, as significant as the Stinger was for showing how far Kia had progressed. Yeah, for those that don't know, the Stinger is a heck of a car if you want a combustion car. But it does show what they can do, and it's not the typical car. It does sort of take the battle to the big German and American makers. He also talked up the possibility of getting Rimac on board. They are the electric hypercar maker. Of course, Hyundai and Kia have recently invested big bucks in Rimac and confirmed, on a different note, a collaboration with the US startup Canoo to build all of their future EVs on the Canoo platform. Now, Canoo, a small startup, and a big company like Hyundai and Kia having to kind of go to the smaller company to get a leg up quickly. So maybe it'll be Rimac, maybe it'll be them. We don't know, but we do know it'll be a very fast halo car, a swoopy sedan, high performance, brilliant. I love stuff like this. But, you know, we also have to talk about the cars that we're driving today, and the Nissan Leaf is the only EV to receive a new Dependability Award. Leading consumer advocate JD Power recognised the Nissan Leaf with top honours in their 2020 Vehicle Dependency Study. Nissan Leaf ranked as the top-performing non-premium vehicle, and at the top of the compact car segment with a score of 83 problems per 100 vehicles is what that refers to. The Nissan Leaf is the first pure electric vehicle to win an overall segment award in the history of this study. Porsche has started delivering the Taycan 4S. If you didn't know, that is the less expensive version that starts at, it's the bargain basement version. It's the one that you and I wouldn't lower ourselves to. A mere $104,000. It's the premium electric car that'll go a little bit further. According to Electric, they say the performance battery, there's two of those by the way, the performance one is the 79.2 kilowatt hour pack, and the performance plus pack, which is 93.4 kilowatt hours. That's the same pack that is in the Turbo, the Taycan Turbo, but the power output's been limited, so the same size but limited to 420 kilowatts, not 560 for the Turbo one. Still has 270 kilowatt charging speed on that, which is heck of a fast charging speed. The smaller battery pack, by the way, will do 253 miles on the WLTP European test cycle, and the bigger battery pack will do 288 miles. Now that's a bit better than the 201 of the previous Taycan. Although, again, this is WLTP, not EPA, which is the American testing. But 288 on the WLTP test standard, even if you take it down a little bit, because it's still a little bit optimistic. But maybe that's 250, 255. I think for people will get a bit fixated on range, don't they? But for a Porsche buyer with enough charging speed of 270 kilowatts, the thing about this Taycan 4S, it's actually a lot more efficient than the Turbo. And so because it's more efficient, but because it still charges as fast, and because it'll do 250 miles, probably in real world a bit less, that's enough for road tripping in a Porsche. It's all about a combination, personally, I think, a combination of battery size. You don't want to carry around a bigger battery than you need because it's heavy and expensive. but also it's about efficiency plus charging speed plus how many of those chargers are available when you actually rock on up to one. All of those things combined, it's not just purely about the range figure. Well, I've still got 4 more stories, and we've got to get to question of the week. This may be a long podcast. Well, this spring break, there's been some changes to Tesla's mapping system. A note that's been pushed out to Tesla owners reads as follows: "We have changed your navigation to show more charging options in Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. Choose the charging symbol at the bottom right of your touchscreen, scroll down and select either Supercharger, Destination Charger, or Public Charger to see them on your route." That's right, Tesla has now started adding third-party public chargers. They have different access requirements, and it says you may need to download an app like Plug Surfing to create an account and make use of the charger. They do warn you, not as simple as supercharging. This functionality will be improved in future software updates as we add new chargers, they say, and I don't know which ones they're adding. Is it just the HPCs, like the super-fast Ionity network? Is it other one? Is it just 50 kilowatt plus? I don't know, I'd like to know more about this, but fantastic that in some countries in Europe, they're adding third-party chargers. Of course, over here, they can do because Teslas use the CCS combo plug. In the US, they have their own proprietary plug, and that might be a little bit more difficult to start adding in third-party chargers. But as long as you've got like a little filter, I suppose, on screen, like you might just only want to be supercharging. You might be like, you know what, I don't want third-party. As long as you can, and by the sounds of it, you can just select what type of chargers to see along your route. That's fine. Hey, I wonder if you select, on this new mapping system inside European Teslas, if you select a third-party charger, whether it will still do the battery preheating. If you navigate to one of them, you can navigate to the superchargers and it'll get the battery nice and toasty to take the full charge speed. Will that work? Hey, if you're listening and you can test it out, I'd love to know. Staying with Tesla, they're offering rear heated seats for the Model 3 Standard Range and the Model 3 Standard Range Plus. It's an upgrade. You see, let me explain. It can be activated through an over-the-air update, says Joey at Teslarati. The latest update follows a request by a Model 3 owner who asked Elon Musk on Twitter if a cold weather over-the-air update could be used to activate the rear heated seats. Okay, so if you didn't know, Model 3 variants, whichever one you buy, they all have the heated seat hardware in the back, enabling Tesla to easily activate those features through a simple software switch. The rear heated seats were actually active on the really early Model 3 variants with partial premium interior, but then when they kind of rationalised and simplified the lineup, they ultimately disabled it on the Standard Range and Standard Range Plus. Now, for $300, they'll turn them on. They're in your car already. Do you want them? Got people in the back who would like a warm bum rather than using the aircon? It's a more efficient way of heating up your passengers than the whole cabin with some HVAC. Well, for $300, you can now have it turned on. All of these little things, by the way, are whole new revenue streams for car companies which weren't available before. So as people make EVs that have software over-the-air updates, they can do things like this. They can just build the car because it's also simpler. It's also much more simple to have a production line and to have one spec rear seat. And if that rear seat is integrated with heaters, but you don't want to activate them because it's a premium feature on the lineup, I'm super fine with that. I'm fine paying a cheaper headline price and picking and choosing which features I pay for. Now, that's not traditional Tesla territory. They've normally been, I always compare them to Apple. Very, very simple. But then, then Apple launched the watch. And you can have 2 sizes and about 4 or 5 different colours and materials, and aluminium and steel and the straps. Well, it's almost infinite combinations. And so, maybe these days Tesla's becoming more of that kind of company, which is, here's the price of the car, but here's the options list. That's always been the traditional car maker style, hasn't it? It's always been like, well, if you want a reasonably nice car, you're going to have to spec it up, and here's the list of things to pick from. Tesla just making a few baby steps towards that. Well, if you placed an order for the Volkswagen ID3 in the UK, or maybe you intend to put a deposit down soon, you might be waiting a while for it to arrive. Says the website This Is Money. The Allen Day Group of dealers, which was given their allocation, I'll admit it's not a lot. It's 35. There'll be more, but to begin with, 35 of them for that particular group of dealers to the UK. Said their allocation was bought within an hour. I'm not surprised, there's not many. Being made available online last May. They filled up very quickly. Now, this article says the cars will be arriving, according to This Is Money, which is an article that I've seen picked up by others like Electrek and stuff. These cars will be arriving at the end of March, 28th or 29th. Well, it's interesting. There was a recent VW ID3 launch event that I know a few people that went to, including one of our former guests and premium partner of the show and sponsor of this, Phil Roberts of Electric Future. He was there. Took Mrs. Roberts. I'm sure she was delighted. And they said only a couple of weeks ago to the people that had stumped up, because he's a reservation holder, to their face, July or August. So what's the difference between being told at an event by VW, specifically put on for early reservation holders, July or August, because you guys at first, you put your money down first. This article says the end of March. Those two things don't add up. Only one of them can be true. We'll see. Okay, moving on. And this week, Tesla locked in a new patent for distributed hey, that's easy for me to say. Distributed electrical grid management systems. I could edit this podcast, but when you listen to it, by the way, it's good for you to know I never edit this. So it's normally a one-take wonder. Not today. I had 2 run-ups at that one. Hey, look, what does this mean? Potentially, it's huge. It might just be a patent application, or it may be an indication to how you'll be paying for electricity in the future. This new idea of Tesla's gives them the capability to control everything on a massive grid-scale energy storage installation, all the way down to individual consumers' laundry machines, TVs and things like that. Reports Clean Technica. This new patent is a natural extension of what at the minute is Tesla's grid controller solution that manages grid scale assets, but this new solution takes it one step further, and it folds in Tesla's in-home energy solutions, and then a bit more as well. The result proposed in the new patent is an end-to-end management system with the capability to identify and then manage those things that are using electricity on the grid, in homes, in businesses, as a means of balancing the grid more effectively. It leverages each asset on the grid as part of an overall system. It means that in a world where you have energy stored in your car, you have energy stored in your power wall, you have energy being created on top of your roof with the solar glass, all of that can be managed by your electrical company. And who will be your energy provider in the future? Who's going to be sending you your electric bill? There are many people saying, in the future, Americans will be paying their bill to Tesla, and that this whole making cars thing is simply Act 1, and that where they'll eventually end up is being a big energy company, where they provide how you move around from A to B, how you store your electricity, how you generate your electricity, and how that is managed across streets, suburbs, regions and cities. And maybe even whole countries. That is looking into the crystal ball and wondering, what does this patent really mean? We'll see. Okay, let's get on to question of the week right now. And oh man, it's been popular. And all the stories have been so good. I've tried to edit them down as much as possible. And also not only in length, but also in how many I read out. But this is as short as I can get. So apologies, it's a long podcast, but I really want to read these ones out. We're talking about the longest road trips you've done in an EV. I'm looking at maybe doing 1,000 miles from Dorset, where I live, the south of GB, down to Italy, about 1,028 miles each way, in a car that charges at 22 kilowatts and has a 41 kilowatt hour battery. So, should I do it? And what's your experiences of long road trips? And actually, if they are doable, what stops everyone else? Is it just the perception? We're going to find out today. Stick around. Jan from eMobility. It's Jan, isn't it? Sorry, that's a bad start. Jan from eMobilityNorway.com. Well, Jan says, we had our most extended EV road trip in the summer of 2018. We started in Halden in Norway, went down the Swedish west coast to Gothenburg, and took the ferry to Denmark, then headed to Leipzig for visiting the BMW site where they make the i3 and the i8. Next stop, Prague. Travelled to Munich to see the Ionity teams and visit BMW. On our way to Italy, we drove through Austria and Switzerland, crossed the Stelvio Pass. In Italy, we went to Lake Garda, Venezia, Firenze, Toscana, Geneva, before a short visit to France and Chamonix. On our trip home, we saw Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands. On our 3-week journey, we did 6,500 kilometres in 12 countries, including Norway. As a charging nerd, I tested my BMW i3 in every country. The largest barrier for travelling long distance is simply in our head. Well, thank you, Jan, and that's a great email to start with. David Partington says, the longest trip I ever did was 500 miles each way from London to Dundee in a 24 kilowatt-hour Nissan Leaf in December 2018. 13 hours and 10 rapids to cover 500 miles. Not a journey for the faint-hearted. A bit of an adventure. In some ways, I can't wait to try it again later on this year to see if I can do it more quickly in summer and more rapid charges in place. John Nodell says the longest trip I did in my Tesla Model 3, rear-wheel drive long range. Nice car. 550 miles each way. Santa Barbara to the northeast forests of California. A robust fast charging network is the cure for range anxiety. Charging was slowed since I went to 100% so I could have climate control on at nights, while our ice car compadres bundled up in tents and trailers. He slept in the car. Did have to stop at a gas station, though. So many bugs from driving on the Central Valley in California. The autopilot cameras and the human cameras ended up getting a little bit dirty. Jim McLaren says, my Nissan Leaf, I've done a number of 400-mile road trips. I picked up my new Tesla Model 3 and got more adventurous. In November, I set off on a 1,200-mile journey from Falkirk outside Edinburgh to Spain, ran a marathon, had a coffee and a sandwich, drove home again, slept in the car on the way, and the abundance of Tesla supercharger stations made it very easy. The Level 2 autonomous features of the car meant that over 90% of the way, the car did the hard work, taking the strain out of the drive. Anders Hove. Last year, I did 3 1,000-mile EV trips on 3 continents to check out the charging infrastructure. In California, from Beijing to Inner Mongolia, and Germany and France, the latter being the longest of the 3. But it's evolving so fast, Anders wants to do it again. I'm very interested in the route that you are considering, he says, since for my European trip, I'd considered going to Italy, but it looked like charging infrastructure was sparse. On my European trip, EV renting was inflexible. Brent Kingsford, after 6 months, I bought my Chevy Bolt and decided to prove to myself that a very quick 1,200-mile road trip from Washington State to the University of Utah in Salt Lake City was possible. With help from PlugShare, I mapped my route, a few charger issues, we made it there, moved my son, turned around and drove back again. There were a few times that I was worried about making to the next charger, but we did. James Dubban says, 4 months into owning our Model 3 dual motor long range, we set off across the USA, Florida to Washington. 2,500 miles in 3 days, 20 supercharging stops, healthiest trip I ever took. The week with friends and family, and 2 more weeks wandering across the west of the US, seeing 10 national parks. We drove 7,200 miles, he says. Mark Weston. I took my 3-week-old Hyundai Kona last May. It's a full electric car, by the way, just outside Waltham Abbey in Essex to East Kilbride in Scotland, 400 miles each way. Being a novice, made some mistakes and relying on some chargers that weren't reliable. You know the ones I'm talking about, at the motorway service stations. Matthew Booth says, I myself have driven 480 kilometres each way from northern Switzerland to Italy for our holiday in my Jaguar I-Pace. No difference to driving an ICE car, except it's quieter and more relaxing, and more charging stations in Europe now, so it's not even challenging. Bill Miller says, when we got our new BMW i3, I convinced my reluctant wife to take a road trip, a sizable chunk of southeastern USA, taking our journey through 6 states some of which were unaware of EVs at the time. The entire state of Alabama had no public charging stations back in the day. However, all the car dealers had one, and they helped him out. Even a Nissan dealer, he drives a BMW, mind, the Nissan dealer offered to run them into a local restaurant for lunch while the car charged. Good on you, Nissan. Mark Walker said, I'm emailing to answer your question of the week. To date, our longest EV road trip has been Parry Sounds to Cornwall, about 500 kilometres, no issues, apart from having to take different routes, whether we're charging on a level 2 or just want to get there quickly. I have an EV road trip planned for the summer. It's 1,800 kilometres, not even overly concerned, because we'll be charging overnight when we stop. And we have a 2-year-old who needs brakes as well. Very much looking forward to it. They have a 64 kilowatt hour Kona. Of course, they're in Canada, so that comes with the heat pump. A further interesting tidbit, by the way, he was charging and he saw a Tesla Model Y in Ontario, minus 25 degrees Celsius outside, and it was supercharging on California plates, so it had driven there to do some cold weather testing for the Model Y. Johan Einovik. I dream of driving with my family to Spain and back 3,000 kilometres from Sweden, and I'll do it in a Model Y. Tom Last says, my first big EV road trip was Anglesey to Samoën in the French Alps, and I was charging for free in my Tesla Model S 85D back in February 2016. The supercharging network was so much less developed then than it is today. A few big gaps where he had to hypermile to get there. In October 2019, he did another trip to Lake Geneva, and then home via the Nürburgring in his Model 3. Performance difference was massive, he said. Superchargers everywhere. Wasn't even a challenge. Nico Janssen says, we drove more than 3,000 kilometres in 3 weeks in a Renault Zoe ZE40. Yeah, my car. Went from Belgium to Sweden on a holiday. Charging stops were long because it only charges at 22 kilowatts, and then it slows down about 90%, I think, in the ZE40. Starts to taper off. Had some trouble with rapid gating. The first day was 40 degrees. Yeah, that's going to be pretty warm for any EV battery. Finding a charger was a challenge, he says. But enough superchargers if you were going to take a Tesla. Guillaume, I've been doing international trips for the last 5 years with 2 Nissan Leafs and 1 BMW i3. Ireland to France and Corsica, Italy and Monaco, Switzerland, Germany, the Frankfurt Motor Show, Luxembourg, Belgium and back to France and Ireland. 4,500 kilometres in 3 days. He says don't try and drive more than 600 kilometres in a day, and there's plenty of 22 kilowatt AC posts through France, which my Zoe will feel right at home with. Sharon and Michael Moss, we're currently on our return trip from Fully Charged in Austin, where we displayed our Kia Soul. By the time we get home, we'll have done 6,500 miles from our home in Vancouver Island, Canada. Other than that, the extra few hours to charge has added to a day's travel. We found that the EV road trip was no different, apart from it being more quiet, and at most fast charging stations we were the only vehicle and didn't have to wait. We found that when we stopped to charge, we spent the time eating, taking a bathroom break and taking a quick walk or checking out local attractions. Much more fun than flying. Henrik Brandt. Last fall, my wife and I took a road trip from Copenhagen to Volterra in Italy in a 2015 Model S 70D, 4,500 kilometres, 29 charging stops, and supercharging all the way. Jeff Urbies did 2,100 miles in a road trip on a round trip. First long road trip, and it went fine, of course. Tesla tells you where you need to charge, when and where. Took 2 days to do 2,100 miles and stayed in a hotel that also had chargers. When you get there, charge on 110 kilowatt outlet, 110 volt outlet rather, which if you're staying for a few days doesn't matter. Steve Burkett from Plug and Play EV. I just did 4,200 miles round trip from Boston, Massachusetts to Austin, Texas in my Chevy Bolt EV for Fully Charged Live USA. Lots of folks come from far-flung corners of the country in Teslas, but I felt like the few of us who did it in non-Teslas proved the important point. The North American public charging infrastructure is now extensive and reliable enough to get across the country in a short space of time. I left on the Wednesday, got to Austin on Friday, did the weekend there, back on the following Tuesday. Marcus Lafer. I wouldn't be concerned to go from the UK to Pisa if you use NewMotion/Shell. Yeah, Shell bought NewMotion. Use the charge cards, take into consideration the number of chargers en route. Maybe in Italy could be more of a challenge, not in Western Europe. Steve Davies says, my wife and I made a US cross-country trip from New Jersey to Arizona this holiday season. The most relaxing long drive I've ever done, he says. 5 days each way, 3 or 4 supercharger stops every day, 25 minutes of charge and free destination charging at hotels. And finally, Jack. I've loved this episode, by the way. Jack says, in August 2018, my wife and I loaded up our Chevrolet Bolt and drove from home in eastern Massachusetts to Southern California and back for a family get-together. 7,000 miles in total. We folded down the back seats of the Bolt and stuffed the usual luggage plus a tent and camping supplies, bought a 32-amp EVSE to charge at campgrounds overnight, and ordered an RFID card for every charging network and got all the apps. I planned the route. We drove past Electrify America construction sites all the way. The same trip would have been very different the following summer. Yeah, you're right. The infrastructure is just getting so much better. I hope that on today's podcast, if you are EV curious, if you listen to this and maybe you're undecided, but you're doing research, I hope that all of those stories, or maybe you're an EV owner like me and thinking, 1,000 miles, that can be a challenge. Different country, different language, different currencies. No, it's certainly not. The reason I've put so many of the stories in, and I didn't have time for all of them as well this week, is to prove owning an EV is no different to owning a car. It's just owning a car. And in many ways, as you can see, better than doing it in a fossil gobbler. The whole experience is better. I've really enjoyed this week's show. Thank you to everyone who sent me their feedback. Okay, a brand new question of the week right now with myev.com, inspired by one of the questions on today's podcast. How do you feel about paying for extra features after you've bought a car? How do you feel about paying for extra features after the car is yours and in the driveway or outside your house? All about Tesla starting to charge people for more things after they've bought the car. Of course, now the entertainment package, the premium, the connectivity package, that is now a monthly recurring bill. Turning on some heated seats, another $300. Are you okay with that? Or do you want EV makers of the future not to be going down that route of, like on your mobile phone, if you want an app, you got to pay for it. Do you mind having an EV and then you want this extra feature and then having to pay extra for it? Or should cars come as they are? Let me know what you want out of an EV. You can email me hello@evnewsdaily.com or leave a comment on the YouTube show. Thank you to everyone who supports this show. Loads of new names this week on Patreon. I've read all the new names out over the last week. Thank you so much to you guys. 236 patrons of the show. I really appreciate it. All of the premium partners, I mention your names every day because you do support at a really high level. Phil Roberts of Electric Future, Brad Crosby and Avid Technology. Also my partners, David Allen, OEM Audio of New Zealand and evpower.co.nz for your accessories in New Zealand. Paul O'Connor, thank you Paul. TryEV.com here in the UK, getting people to get behind the wheel. Gareth Hamer, my partner. eMobility Norway, we heard from Jan earlier on the show, and a new name as of this week, Bob Boothby. And all of my executive producers. I do it on a Sunday. I read your names out. I know some people don't like this bit of the show. I get people saying, oh, come on, why do you do it every week? Because I appreciate the fact that someone gives up their own money to make a podcast. You, Alan Robson, Alan Shedd, Alex Banahini, Alexander Frank, Anders Hove, Andrea Jefferson, Asir Khalid, Ashley Hill, Bjard Fuchstack, Brent Kingsford, Brian Thompson, Brian Weatherall, Bruce Bohannon, Charles Hall, Chris Hopkins, Colin Hennessy, Craig Coles, Craig Rogers, Damien Davis, Dan Fairs, Darren Bird, Darren Feach, Darren Sant and Yorkshire EVs, Dave Jewson, David Barkman, David Finch, David Partington, David Prescott, Derek Riley from the Dublin EV Owners Club, Don McAllister at screencastsonline.com, Enrico Stefanchillo, Frederick Rovick, Free Jewel, who's James, Gene Rubin, Jeff Lowe, Headley Wright, Ian Griffiths, Ian Sear, Jack Oakley, James Storr, Jerry Allison, Jim Morris, John Bailey, John C. Solar, John Lacey from Click Clack Video NZ, John, who's Beardy McBeardface at Kent EVs, John Nodell, Juan Gonzalez, Ken Morris, Kevin Mayerson, Carl Mann, Lars Dallagher, Lawrence D. Allen, Lee Brown, Luke Cully, Marcel Lohman, Marcel Ward, Mark Bossett, Marlon Shell, Matt Piccioni, Maz Shah, Mia Oppelstrup, Michael Pastroni, Michael Coffin, Mike Rogers, Mike Winter, Nathan Gore-Brown, Neil E. Roberts and Sussex EVs, Northern Explorers, Ohad Aston, Paul Ridings, Paul Shelley, Paul Stevenson, Perry Simpkins, Pete Glass, Pete Gordon, Peter and D. Roberts, Oxen EVs. With Evie now. Phil Mouchet, Pontus Kinblad, Rajiv Narayan, Rene Schneider, Rob Cooling at appledriving.co.uk, Rob Hermans, Robert Grace, Robin Tanner, Rupert Mitchell, our guest yesterday, Sari Kangasoja, Seiki Payne, Stephen Penn, Steve John, Thomas J. Tierce, the Plug Seekers EV YouTube channel, Tim Gutteridge and William Langhorne. All of the previous 698 shows in the archive, 700 on the board tomorrow. Wowzers. You can come and say hi on socials by searching EV News Daily. Have a wonderful day. Catch you tomorrow. And remember, there's no such thing as a self-charging hybrid.